I pretended to leave the house. Then I turned on the baby monitor. What my husband said left me frozen. The front door slammed shut with a dramatic, bone-rattling thud that echoed through the quiet suburban hallway. I stood on the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had just walked out on my husband, my marriage, and my life. Or so it seemed. In reality, I had only taken 3 steps before crouching down behind the large potted fern near the entrance. My hands were shaking as I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, my fingers fumbling to open the baby monitor app. I had left my husband, David, alone with our 6-month-old son, Leo. For the past week, David had been acting strangely. He was jumpy, sweating profusely, and constantly checking his phone. He had also started locking the nursery door when he thought I wasn't looking. My mother's intuition was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Was he hiding an affair? Was he planning to take Leo and run? The thoughts were driving me insane. So, I devised a plan. I would fake a dramatic exit, and then I would listen. The app connected. The screen lit up with the grainy, black and white feed from the nursery camera. I held my breath, pressing the phone to my ear to catch every whisper. David walked into the frame. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. He walked over to the crib and looked down at Leo, who was cooing happily, kicking his little legs in the air. David let out a long, heavy sigh. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My blood ran cold. A box? Was he leaving me? Was he packing Leo's things? David opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring, but a tiny, intricate silver locket. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. He sat down in the rocking chair, holding the locket up to the dim nightlight. "I'm so sorry, buddy," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I promised Mom I wouldn't do this. I know she said it's bad luck to talk about the past. But I can't keep it from you anymore." I frowned, confusion replacing my fear. What past? What was he talking about? David leaned closer to the baby, his face softening into an expression of pure, unadulterated love. "Your mom, she thinks I'm hiding something dark. She thinks I'm a monster. But I'm just a guy who is terrified of losing the 2 most important people in his life." He paused, wiping a tear from his eye. "This locket, it belonged to my grandmother. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. She survived a war, a famine, and losing everything she owned. And she always said that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, even when your legs are shaking." He gently placed the locket in Leo's tiny hand. The baby grabbed it immediately, giggling. "I want you to know her story, Leo. I want you to know that our family has always been about resilience. Your mom, she's the bravest person I know. She fights for us every single day. And I'm just trying to be worthy of her. I'm trying to be the man she deserves." I sat on the porch, tears streaming down my face. I had expected betrayal. I had expected lies. Instead, I was listening to my husband pour his heart out to our son, sharing a legacy of strength and love. I had misjudged him completely. My suspicion had blinded me to the beautiful, vulnerable man I had married. Just then, the nursery door creaked open. I froze. On the monitor, I saw my mother-in-law, Eleanor, step into the room. She was a formidable woman, elegant but stern, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. "David," she said, her voice sharp. "What are you doing in here? You know the rules. No sentimental nonsense before bedtime. It makes the boy restless." David quickly stood up, hiding the locket behind his back. "Mom, I was just checking on him." Eleanor walked over to the crib, her expression softening slightly as she looked at Leo. "He's fine. He's strong. He doesn't need stories about the past. He needs discipline. He needs to learn that the world is a hard place." "That's not true, Mom," David said, his voice firm. "The world is hard, yes. But love makes it bearable. And I want Leo to know he's loved. Unconditionally. Eleanor sighed, shaking her head. You're too soft, David. Just like your father. And look where that got him. The tension in the room was palpable. I wanted to burst in, to defend David, to tell Eleanor that she was wrong. But I stayed hidden, watching, listening. David took a deep breath. Maybe I am soft. But I'm also a father. And I will raise my son to be kind, to be empathetic, and to be strong in his own way. Not your way, Mom. My way. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, a small, sad smile touched her lips. You really are your father's son, she whispered. She turned and walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind her. David slumped back into the rocking chair, letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He looked at Leo, who was now chewing on the silver locket. Well, buddy, he said with a weak chuckle. That was intense. But we did it. We stood our ground. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs stiff from crouching. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. I walked into the house, my footsteps deliberate. David heard me and jumped up, his face pale. Sarah? I thought you left. I walked into the nursery, my eyes meeting his. I didn't say a word. I just walked over to him, took the locket from Leo's mouth, and placed it gently back in David's hand. Then, I wrapped my arms around him and held him tight. I heard everything, I whispered into his shoulder. I'm so sorry, David. I was wrong. I was so wrong. David hugged me back, his body relaxing against mine. It's okay, he murmured. I should have told you. I was afraid you'd think I was weak. Afraid you'd think I wasn't handling things well. I pulled back and looked at him, smiling through my tears. You're the strongest man I know, David. And I love you. I love us. Just then, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She looked at us, her expression unreadable. For a second, I thought she would launch into another lecture about discipline and hardness. But instead, she cleared her throat. Well, she said, her voice slightly less sharp than before. It seems I've interrupted a moment. I'll make some tea. Chamomile. It's good for the nerves. She turned and walked away. David and I looked at each other, surprised. Did she just? I started. Make peace? David finished, grinning. Maybe. Or maybe she's just plotting her next move. But for now, I'll take it. We laughed, the tension of the past week dissolving into the warm air of the nursery. Leo gurgled happily, waving his arms. We had faced a misunderstanding, a hidden past, and a formidable mother-in-law. And we had come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. Later that evening, we sat in the living room, sipping Eleanor's chamomile tea. She sat across from us, her posture rigid as always, but her eyes were softer. So, she said, stirring her tea. David told you about the locket? Yes, I said. He did. It's beautiful, Eleanor. Thank you for keeping it safe all these years. Eleanor looked down at her cup. It was my mother's. She gave it to me on her deathbed. She told me that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being able to bend without snapping. I forgot that for a while. I thought if I was hard enough, I could protect my family from pain. But I was wrong. Pain is part of life. And love is what helps us survive it. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, but she didn't pull away. We're here for you, Eleanor. You don't have to be strong alone. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. For the first time, I saw the vulnerability beneath her stern exterior. She nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know. The next few weeks were different. Eleanor still offered unsolicited advice, but it was less about discipline and more about practical tips. She taught me how to make her famous apple pie, and I taught her how to use the baby monitor app, which she pretended to hate but secretly loved. David was more relaxed, more open. He shared more stories about his grandmother, about his childhood, about his fears and hopes. One afternoon, while Leo was napping, David and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I'm glad you didn't really leave," David said, squeezing my hand. "I'm glad I didn't either," I replied. "But I'm also glad I listened." It reminded me that we're a team. And that even when we're scared, we can face anything together. He smiled, leaning his head on my shoulder. "Anything?" "Anything," I confirmed. "Even your mom's apple pie. That thing is deadly." He laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Hey, it's a family recipe. It's supposed to be intense." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Life wasn't perfect. There would be more misunderstandings, more challenges, more moments of fear. But we had learned the most important lesson, that love, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms, was the anchor that kept us steady. A few months later, we hosted a small family gathering to celebrate Leo's first birthday. Eleanor was there, of course, wearing a stylish dress and holding a perfectly wrapped gift. She handed it to me with a rare smile. "For Leo," she said. "From his great-grandmother." I opened it to find a small, leather-bound book. Inside were handwritten recipes, stories, and sketches. On the first page, in elegant cursive, it read, "For Leo. May you always know your roots, and may you always reach for the sky. With love, Great-Grandma Eleanor." I looked up at Eleanor, my throat tight with emotion. "This is incredible, Eleanor." "Thank you." She waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes were bright. "It's just old papers. Don't make a fuss." But it wasn't just old papers. It was a legacy. A testament to resilience, to love, to the strength of women who had come before us. And now, it was ours. As the party went on, I watched David playing with Leo, making him giggle with silly faces. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, watching them with a soft, contented expression. I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked me over. I had almost lost this. I had almost let my fears and suspicions tear us apart. But I had listened. I had heard the truth. And in doing so, I had found a deeper, more profound connection with my husband and my mother-in-law. Later that night, after the guests had left and Leo was asleep in his crib, I went into the nursery. I picked up the silver locket, which now hung on a small chain around Leo's neck. I traced the intricate design with my finger, thinking of the woman who had worn it, the strength she had possessed, the love she had given. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty room. "For everything." I turned off the light and closed the door, leaving Leo to his dreams. As I walked back to my bedroom, I passed the baby monitor. I glanced at it, smiling. I didn't need to listen in anymore. I knew what I would hear, the quiet, steady rhythm of a family that had found its way back to each other. David was waiting for me in bed, reading a book. He looked up as I entered, marking his page. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, climbing into bed beside him. "Everything is perfect." He kissed my forehead, turning off his lamp. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, David." We lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a full, rich silence, filled with the echoes of laughter, the warmth of love, and the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely at peace. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. I stretched, smiling, and walked into the kitchen. David was at the stove, flipping pancakes with a flourish. Leo was in his high chair, banging a spoon on the tray, covered in oatmeal. "Good morning, sunshine," David said, turning to grin at me. "Breakfast is served." I walked over and kissed him, then wiped oatmeal off Leo's chin. "You're a good man, David Miller." "I try," he said, winking. Now, eat up. We've got a big day ahead of us. What's on the agenda? I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Park. Playground. And maybe, if we're lucky, a nap for both of us. I laughed. Sounds like a plan. We spent the day at the park, pushing Leo on the swings, watching him discover the world with wide, curious eyes. Eleanor joined us later, bringing a picnic basket filled with sandwiches and her famous apple pie. She sat on a blanket under a large oak tree, watching us with a serene expression. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, I sat down beside her. "Thank you for coming," I said. She patted my hand. "I wouldn't miss it. He's special, Sarah. He has your eyes. And David's stubbornness." I laughed. "That's a dangerous combination." "It is," she agreed, smiling. "But it's also a powerful one. He'll go far." We watched David push Leo on the swing, higher and higher. Leo's laughter rang out, clear and joyful, echoing through the park. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had learned to listen, to understand, to forgive. And in doing so, we had built a foundation of love that was unshakable. As we packed up to leave, David picked up Leo, who was now sleepy and yawning. Eleanor carried the picnic basket. I held David's hand. We walked out of the park, a family, whole and complete. And as we drove home, Leo asleep in his car seat, I looked at David, then at Eleanor in the rearview mirror. I felt a sense of belonging so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I had pretended to leave. But in reality, I had found my way home. The warm glow of reconciliation from the nursery had faded faster than a candle in a hurricane. By the time the sun rose the next morning, casting long, accusing shadows across our kitchen floor, the peace I had felt was nothing but a distant memory. The air in the house was thick, heavy with unspoken words and the lingering scent of burnt toast. David was standing by the coffee machine, his back rigid. He was wearing his work face, the one where he clenched his jaw so hard I could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. He hadn't looked at me once since he walked into the kitchen. "David," I said, my voice steady despite the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "We need to talk. About last night. About the locket. About your mother." David flinched as if I had slapped him. He turned slowly, his eyes bloodshot, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a decade. "Sarah, please. Not now. I have a big meeting. I can't deal with this right now." "You can't deal with it?" I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that startled Leo, who was banging his spoon on his high chair tray. "David, I faked leaving my own house because I thought you were having an affair or kidnapping our son. I listened to you talk about family secrets and bad luck and your mother's rules. And now you're telling me you can't deal with it?" David ran a hand through his messy hair, letting out a frustrated groan. "It's not what you think, Sarah. It's complicated. Mom has her ways. She's old-fashioned. She believes in certain traditions. I didn't want to upset you." "Upset me?" I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. "David, hiding things from your wife doesn't protect her. It isolates her. What is in that locket? Why does Eleanor hate it so much? And why were you crying?" David's face crumpled. For a second, I thought he was going to break. He opened his mouth, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, it's about the family curse. The weakness. Mom thinks if we acknowledge it, it will come for Leo. She thinks silence is strength." "Family curse?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. "David, we live in the 21st century. We have pediatricians and science. What are you talking about?" Before David could answer, the front door opened with a sharp click. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eleanor swept into the kitchen, dressed in an immaculate navy blue suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun that looked like it could deflect bullets. She carried a leather handbag that probably cost more than our car. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the high chair, peering down at Leo with the critical eye of a health inspector. "He looks pale. Is he getting enough iron?" "I told you, David, the modern diet is full of empty calories. He needs liver. Pate, specifically." I felt my blood boil. "Good morning to you too, Eleanor. And no, Leo does not need liver pâté. He is 6 months old. He eats pureed sweet potatoes and peas." Eleanor finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Sweet potatoes," she scoffed, as if I had suggested feeding him gravel. "Soft food for a soft generation. No wonder he is so pliable." "He's a baby, Eleanor, not a soldier," I snapped. David stepped between us, his hands raised in a surrender gesture. "Mom, Sarah, please. Can we just have a normal breakfast? No talk of liver, no talk of curses, no talk of anything." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Curses? Who mentioned curses, David?" Her gaze snapped to me, sharp and suspicious. "Sarah, what have you been telling him? Filling his head with nonsense?" "I didn't say anything," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I asked him about the locket. The one you forbade him from showing Leo. The one that supposedly brings bad luck." Eleanor's face went rigid. The mask of polite indifference slipped, revealing a flash of genuine fear beneath. She straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full, intimidating height. "That locket is a family heirloom. It is not a toy for a child. And it is certainly not a topic for discussion at the breakfast table." "Why?" I demanded, stepping around David to face her. "Why is it so dangerous? What are you hiding?" Eleanor stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. For a moment, the silence stretched so tight I thought it might snap. Then, she let out a cold, humorless laugh. "You wouldn't understand, Sarah. You come from a family of open books. Loud emotions. Messy feelings. In my family, we protect our own. We keep our weaknesses hidden. Because the world does not forgive weakness. It devours it." She turned to David, her expression softening into something terrifyingly maternal. "David, darling, finish your coffee. You look tired. Stress is bad for the complexion. And Sarah," she added, glancing at me over her shoulder, "perhaps you should take the day off. Rest. Hysteria is exhausting for everyone." With that, she turned on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots on the hardwood floor. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked at David, expecting him to be angry, to defend me, to tell his mother to go to hell. But he just stood there, staring at his coffee cup, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "David," I said, my voice quiet now, filled with a deep, aching sadness. "Did you hear her? She called me hysterical. She called our son weak. And you just stood there." David looked up, his eyes filled with shame. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't fight her. Not today. Not when she's like this." "Like what?" I asked. "Controlling? Cruel? Protective," he whispered. "She's trying to protect us." "From what?" I shouted, the frustration finally boiling over. "From love? From truth? From me?" David didn't answer. He just picked up his briefcase, kissed Leo lightly on the forehead, and walked out the door without looking back. The slam of the front door was softer than the one I had faked the night before, but it hurt infinitely more. I was alone in the kitchen with Leo, who was now whimpering, sensing my distress. I picked him up, holding him close, breathing in the sweet, milky scent of his hair. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, rocking him gently. Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere. But as I looked around the pristine, silent kitchen, I realized that wasn't entirely true. A part of me had already left. The part that trusted David. The part that believed we were a team. And the part that thought Eleanor was just a difficult mother-in-law. Now, I knew she was something else. She was a gatekeeper. And she was guarding a secret that was tearing my family apart. I walked over to the window, watching David's car pull out of the driveway. I saw Eleanor's car parked neatly in the garage. She hadn't left. She was still here. Watching. Waiting. A cold determination settled over me, replacing the fear and the anger. If David wouldn't fight for the truth, I would. If Eleanor wanted to play games with secrets and silence, I would play too. But I had one advantage she didn't expect. I wasn't afraid of her. And I wasn't afraid of the past. I looked down at Leo, who had stopped crying and was looking up at me with wide, curious blue eyes. "All right, little man," I said, a small, fierce smile touching my lips. "Let's go see what Grandma Eleanor is really hiding." I walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps light and silent. The detective work was about to begin. And this time I wasn't going to stop until I had every single answer. I had always considered myself a rational person. I was a former accountant, I dealt in facts, figures, and concrete numbers. But as I stood in the hallway, watching David's car disappear down the street and hearing the faint, rhythmic clicking of Eleanor's heels as she paced in the upstairs study, I realized that rationality had no place in this house anymore. I was now a woman on a mission. A mother bear. A detective in yoga pants. I gently placed Leo back in his high chair, handing him a silicone teething ring shaped like a pineapple. "Stay here, Agent Leo," I whispered, tapping his nose. "Mommy has to go investigate a potential crime scene." Leo gurgled, banging the pineapple against the tray. I took it as a sign of approval. My first target, the nursery. I crept toward the baby's room, my socks sliding silently over the polished oak floors. My heart was pounding, not with fear this time, but with adrenaline. I had seen David hide the locket in the top drawer of the changing table. If I could find it, maybe I could find a clue. A receipt? A letter? Anything that explained why Eleanor looked at that piece of silver like it was a loaded gun. I pushed the nursery door open. The room was bathed in soft morning light, the mobile of spinning stars casting gentle shadows on the walls. It looked so innocent, so peaceful. It was a stark contrast to the storm raging in my mind. I moved to the changing table, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled open the top drawer. Diapers. Wipes. A half-empty tube of diaper rash cream. I dug deeper, pushing aside stacks of tiny onesies. Nothing. I frowned. Had David moved it? Or had Eleanor? Just then, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Eleanor stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her suit jacket anymore, just a crisp white blouse and tailored trousers. She held a feather duster in one hand, looking for all the world like a stern librarian who had caught me checking out a book without a library card. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Is there a problem?" I quickly shut the drawer, forcing a bright, fake smile onto my face. My cheeks hurt from the effort. "No. No problem at all, Eleanor. Just looking for Leo's other sock. He seems to have developed a sudden interest in going barefoot." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, scanning the room, then landing on the closed drawer. She took a step forward, her movements precise and predatory. "Leo's socks are in the second drawer on the left. Organized by color. White, cream, and light blue. I organized them myself this morning while you were eavesdropping." My face flushed hot. She knew. Of course she knew. "I wasn't eavesdropping," I lied, my voice an octave higher than usual. "I was just checking the baby monitor. You know, making sure the Wi-Fi is working. For safety." Eleanor let out a short, dry laugh. Safety. Yes. That is a priority. But so is respecting boundaries, Sarah. This is my son's house. And my grandson's room. There are certain protocols. Protocols? I echoed, crossing my arms. Like hiding family heirlooms? Like forbidding fathers from talking to their sons? Eleanor's expression hardened. She walked into the room, setting the feather duster down on the dresser with a deliberate clack. Like protecting what matters. You think I am the villain here, Sarah. I can see it in your eyes. You think I am some wicked stepmother from a fairy tale. But you don't know the first thing about this family. Then tell me. I pleaded, stepping closer. Tell me what I'm missing. Why are you so afraid of a little silver locket? Eleanor looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar mask of cold indifference. Some things are better left in the dark, Sarah. Curiosity didn't just kill the cat. It broke its heart. She turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, frustrated and more confused than ever. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall before letting out a groan of frustration. I slumped against the changing table, rubbing my temples. This was impossible. She was a fortress. And I was attacking it with a spoon. But then, my eyes landed on the baby monitor sitting on the shelf. The little green light was blinking steadily. Wait. If Eleanor was so obsessed with protocols and safety, maybe she had her own way of watching Leo. Maybe she had her own camera. Or maybe she had left something behind. I looked back at the drawer. I had checked the top one. But what about the others? I opened the second drawer. Socks, perfectly folded. I opened the third. Burp cloths. I opened the bottom drawer. It was stuck. I tugged at it. It wouldn't budge. I tugged harder. Still nothing. It was as if something heavy was blocking it from the inside. My curiosity spiked. I knelt down, peering into the gap. There, wedged between the back of the drawer and the frame of the table, was a small, folded piece of paper. It looked old, yellowed with age. I reached in, my fingers brushing against the rough edge of the paper. I managed to hook it with my fingernail and pull it out. My hand shook as I unfolded it. It was a photograph. Black and white, faded, with jagged edges. It showed a young woman, strikingly similar to Eleanor, but softer, smiling broadly, holding a baby. But it wasn't David. The baby had dark hair, while David had been blonde as a child. And the woman's eyes, they were filled with a joy I had never seen in Eleanor's face. On the back of the photo, in elegant, looping cursive, were two words, my heart. Who was this? Why was it hidden in Leo's dresser? And why did looking at it make my chest ache with a sadness I couldn't explain? Before I could process it, the sound of the front door opening downstairs made me jump. I quickly shoved the photo into the waistband of my yoga pants and stood up, smoothing my shirt. Sarah? David's voice called from the hallway. I forgot my laptop. Are you home? Panic surged through me. I couldn't let him see me holding this. Not yet. In the nursery. I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. David appeared in the doorway, looking harried. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on me. What are you doing in here? Did something happen to Leo? No, I said, forcing another smile. Just organizing. You know me. Can't stand clutter. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. Right. Well, I just need my laptop. It's on the desk. He walked past me, grabbed his laptop bag, and turned to leave. But as he passed the changing table, he paused. He looked at the bottom drawer, which was slightly ajar. His face went pale. Sarah, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Did you open that drawer? My heart stopped. I was looking for socks. It got stuck. David stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. You don't know what you're doing, Sarah. You're poking around in things you don't understand. Please. Just stop. For Leo's sake. For our sake. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, the photograph burning against my skin. I had struck a nerve. A big one. And now, David was scared. Not of his mother, but of me. I looked down at Leo, who was happily chewing on his pineapple. Well, buddy, I whispered, a determined glint in my eye. It seems Grandma Eleanor and Daddy are both keeping secrets. But secrets have a way of coming out. And I'm going to be ready when they do. I touched the photo in my waistband. My heart. Whoever you were, I was going to find you. And I was going to find out why your memory was so dangerous that it had to be locked away in a drawer. The game was on. And I was no longer just a wife or a mother. I was a hunter. The photograph was burning a hole in my yoga pants, but I couldn't examine it yet. Leo was starting to fuss, his little face scrunching up in that pre-cry grimace that meant he was either hungry, tired, or deeply offended by the lack of attention. I know, buddy, I whispered, scooping him up. Mommy's on the case. But first, lunch. I carried him to the kitchen, my mind racing. David's reaction had been extreme. He wasn't just worried, he was terrified. And Eleanor. Eleanor was a ghost haunting her own house, ruling over us with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. As I warmed up a jar of organic pear puree, I heard the distinct click-clack of Eleanor's heels approaching. I braced myself. If she was going to lecture me about liver pâté again, I was going to scream. But when she entered the kitchen, she wasn't alone. She was carrying a large, antique wooden box that looked like it had survived the Titanic. She set it down on the kitchen island with a heavy thud. Sarah, she announced, her voice brisk. I have decided that Leo's current regimen is insufficient. He needs structure. He needs tradition. He needs the Miller method. I blinked. The Miller method? Is that like sleep training? Eleanor sniffed, opening the wooden box. Inside was an array of bizarre objects, a small, brass-handled brush, a jar of something that smelled like camphor and old books, a tiny woolen cap, and a silver spoon that looked heavy enough to double as a weapon. It is a regimen of resilience, she declared. My mother used it on David. And his father before him. It builds character. It strengthens the Constitution. I stared at the items. Eleanor, that brush looks like it's from the 1800s. And what is that smell? Camphor and eucalyptus, she said proudly. It clears the sinuses and hardens the spirit. Now, bring the boy here. It is time for his first session. I tightened my grip on Leo. Absolutely not. He is 6 months old. He does not need his sinuses cleared with camphor, and he certainly doesn't need a session. Eleanor's eyes flashed. You undermine my authority in my own home. David agreed to this. David is at work, I shot back. And I am his mother. And I say no. For a moment, I thought she might explode. Her nostrils flared, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But then, she took a deep, steadying breath. A strange, calculating smile touched her lips. Very well, she said smoothly. If you will not allow me to assist, I will simply observe. And document. She pulled a small leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen from her pocket. I will be taking notes on his development. His posture. His reflexes. His softness. I rolled my eyes. Fine. Document away. But stay out of my way. For the next hour, Eleanor followed me around the kitchen and living room like a shadow. Every time Leo cooed, she scribbled in her notebook. Every time he dropped his spoon, she made a disapproving noise. When I changed his diaper, she stood in the doorway, watching with the intensity of a hawk. Inefficient, she muttered as I fastened the new diaper. You took 45 seconds. In my day, we did it in 20. Speed is survival, Sarah. In your day, did you also have wipes with aloe vera? I asked sweetly. No, she said stiffly. We had cold water and a washcloth. And we were grateful for it. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter, but it broke the tension. Eleanor looked startled, then offended. What is so amusing? She demanded. Nothing, I said, wiping a tear from my eye. It's just, you're trying so hard. You're trying so hard to make him into a little soldier. But he's just a baby, Eleanor. He doesn't need to survive. He needs to be loved. Eleanor's pen hovered over the paper. For a second, her mask slipped. I saw a flicker of something raw and painful in her eyes. Grief? Regret? Loving is easy, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Surviving is hard. And I will not let him be unprepared. Before I could respond, Leo let out a loud, happy squeal, kicking his legs. He had found his toes. He grabbed them, pulling them toward his mouth with intense concentration. Eleanor watched him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she closed her notebook. He is flexible, she conceded. That is a good trait. In gymnastics. And in life. It was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever received from her. Later that afternoon, while Leo was napping, I finally had a moment alone. I went to the bathroom and locked the door, pulling the photograph from my waistband. I spread it out on the counter, studying it under the bright light. The woman in the photo was beautiful. She had Eleanor's high cheekbones and sharp jawline, but her eyes were warm, crinkled at the corners from smiling. She was holding the dark-haired baby tightly, her head bowed in adoration. My heart. Who was this baby? David was an only child, as far as I knew. Eleanor had never mentioned another child. I turned the photo over, looking for any other clues. There, in the corner, barely visible, was a date, 1985. 1985, David was born in 1988. This was 3 years before David. My heart skipped a beat. Had Eleanor lost a child? A baby who died? The pieces began to fall into place. The obsession with strength. The fear of weakness. The family curse. The locket. It wasn't about a curse. It was about grief. Eleanor had lost a child, and she had spent the last 30 years trying to armor herself and her family against ever feeling that pain again. I felt a wave of sympathy so strong it nearly knocked me over. All this time, I had seen her as a tyrant. But she was just a wounded animal, lashing out because she was afraid. But why hide it? Why not just tell us? Because in Eleanor's world, pain was a weakness. And weakness was not to be spoken of. I heard the front door open. David was home. I quickly hid the photo back in my waistband and washed my hands. I needed to talk to him. Not as an adversary, but as a partner. I found him in the living room, slumped on the couch, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted. David, I said softly, sitting down beside him. He flinched. Sarah, if you're going to yell at me again, I don't have the energy. I'm not going to yell, I said. I took his hand. I want to talk. About your brother. David froze. His face went completely blank, then pale. He pulled his hand away as if I had burned him. What did you say? I found a photo, I said gently. In Leo's dresser. A woman holding a baby. Dated 1985. Who is he, David? David stared at me, his eyes wide with panic. Where did you find that? It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that you've been carrying this alone. And so has your mother. And it's tearing us apart. David buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. For a long minute, the only sound in the room was his ragged breathing. Then, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a sorrow so deep it looked like a physical wound. His name was Michael, he whispered. He was my older brother. He died when he was 6 months old. SIDS. Sudden infant death syndrome. The air left my lungs. Oh, David. Mom, she never recovered, David continued, his voice breaking. She blamed herself. She thought if she had been stronger, stricter, more vigilant, he would have lived. She threw away everything that reminded her of him. Except that photo. And the locket. The locket was Michael's. Mom kept it, but she couldn't bear to look at it. She said it was bad luck. She said talking about him would bring the darkness back. He looked at me, his expression desperate. That's why she's so hard on us, Sarah. That's why she's obsessed with rules and strength. She's terrified that if we let our guard down, even for a second, Leo will die too. And she can't survive losing another son. I reached out and pulled David into my arms. He collapsed against me, sobbing quietly, the weight of 30 years of silence finally breaking. I know, I whispered, stroking his hair. I know. But we're not going to let fear rule us, David. We're going to love Leo. And we're going to help your mother heal. Together. David nodded against my shoulder, his body shaking. I don't know how, he choked out. She's so stubborn. We'll figure it out, I said firmly. Because now we know the truth. And the truth is our weapon. As I held my husband, listening to his quiet sobs, I felt a new resolve harden inside me. Eleanor wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law. She was a grieving mother. And I was going to help her find her way back to the light, even if I had to drag her there kicking and screaming. But first, I needed a plan. A big one. And I knew exactly where to start. The silence in the living room was no longer heavy, it was sacred. After David's confession, we sat there for a long time, holding each other as the afternoon sun slowly faded into twilight. The anger and suspicion that had been poisoning our home had evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. But within that sadness, there was also a glimmer of hope. We finally understood the enemy. It wasn't Eleanor. It was grief. David pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked exhausted, but lighter, as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I haven't said his name out loud in 20 years, he whispered. Michael. It's a beautiful name, I said softly. And he was loved. I could see it in that photo, David. Your mother loved him fiercely. David let out a shaky breath. She did. But she thinks love is what got him killed. She thinks if she hadn't been so sentimental, so relaxed, he would still be here. I squeezed his hand. That's not true, and you know it. But we can't just tell her that. We have to show her. We have to show her that remembering Michael doesn't bring darkness. It brings light. David looked at me, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. What do you have in mind? I smiled, a slow, determined smile. I have a plan. But first, I need to talk to her. Alone. David hesitated. Sarah, she's not going to be easy. If you push her too hard, she'll shut down. I won't push, I promised. I'll just listen. Trust me. David nodded slowly. Okay. She's in the garden. She goes there when she needs to think. I stood up, smoothing my shirt. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I walked out the back door into the cool evening air. The garden was Eleanor's sanctuary. It was immaculate, every rose bush pruned to perfection, every weed ruthlessly eradicated. It was beautiful, but it was also cold. There was no wildness, no chaos. Just order. Eleanor was sitting on a stone bench, her back straight, staring at a bed of white roses. She didn't turn as I approached. I know you're there, Sarah, she said, her voice flat. Your footsteps are too loud. You walk like you own the earth. I sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between us. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Eleanor sighed, her gaze still fixed on the roses. "You found the photo." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yes. And David told me about Michael." Eleanor flinched. Her hands, resting in her lap, clenched into fists. "He had no right," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He promised me. He promised he would never speak of it." "He didn't have a choice, Eleanor," I said gently. "We were falling apart. Your silence was destroying us. David was drowning in it." Eleanor finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. For the first time, she didn't look like a formidable matriarch. She looked like a broken woman. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You have no idea what it's like to lose a child. To hold them 1 minute, and the next, nothing. Just silence." "I can't imagine," I admitted. "But I can imagine what it's like to be afraid. To be so terrified of losing someone that you push them away before they can leave you." Eleanor's breath hitched. She looked away, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I was a bad mother," she choked out. "I was young. I was tired. I put him down for a nap, and I went to make a phone call. Just one phone call. And when I came back..." Her voice broke. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My heart shattered. I moved closer, wrapping an arm around her stiff shoulders. She didn't pull away. She leaned into me, just slightly, her body trembling. "You weren't a bad mother, Eleanor," I said firmly. "You were a human being. And what happened to Michael was a tragedy. It wasn't your fault." "It was," she sobbed. "It was. And I've spent every day since then trying to make sure it never happens again. Trying to be perfect. Trying to be strong." "But you don't have to be perfect," I said. "And you don't have to be strong alone. We're here, Eleanor. David is here. I'm here. And Leo. Leo needs his grandmother. Not the perfect one. The real one." Eleanor pulled back, wiping her face with a handkerchief she produced from her pocket. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Why are you being so kind to me? After everything I've said? After the way I've treated you?" "Because I love your son," I said simply. "And because I see you, Eleanor. I see the woman who loved her baby boy so much that she broke her own heart to protect him. And I want to know her." Eleanor stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, silver key. She held it out to me. "What is this?" I asked. "The key to the attic," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There's a box up there. Michael's box. I haven't opened it in 30 years. I couldn't bear to look." She pressed the key into my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "If you're brave enough to face the past, Sarah, then you can open it. But be warned. It's not just sadness in there. It's love. And love is the most dangerous thing of all." I closed my hand around the key, feeling its weight. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said. "For trusting me." She nodded, standing up. She smoothed her skirt, pulling her mask of composure back into place, but her eyes were softer now. "Don't thank me yet," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "The attic is dusty. And memories are heavy." She walked back into the house, leaving me alone in the garden with the white roses and the silver key. I sat there for a moment, listening to the birds chirping in the trees. The air felt different now. Lighter. The wall of silence had been breached. And now, it was time to face what was behind it. I stood up, clutching the key, and walked back into the house. David was waiting for me in the hallway. He saw the key in my hand and his eyes widened. "Did she?" he started. I nodded. She gave me the key to the attic. To Michael's box. David let out a long breath. Are you ready? No, I admitted. But I'm going to do it anyway. He took my hand. I'll come with you. Together, we climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and dust. In the corner, under a slanted window, sat a small, wooden chest. It was plain, unadorned, but it radiated a sense of profound sorrow. David and I looked at each other. He nodded. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. I lifted the lid. Inside was a treasure trove of memories. Tiny baby clothes, folded neatly. A rattle. A handful of drawings in crayon. And on top, a leather-bound journal. I picked up the journal. On the first page, in elegant cursive, it read, Michael's Story. By Eleanor Miller. I opened it. The first entry was dated the day Michael was born. Today, my heart began to beat outside my body. He is perfect. He is everything. I flipped through the pages. There were entries about his first smile, his first laugh, his first steps. And then, the entries became shorter, more frantic. He's sleeping so much. Is this normal? I'm so tired. I just need a minute. And then, the last entry. My heart has stopped. The world is gray. I will never be whole again. Tears streamed down my face. I looked at David. He was crying too, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. She loved him so much, David whispered. She still does, I said. And she's going to learn that it's okay to remember him. That remembering him doesn't mean losing Leo. I closed the journal and held it to my chest. We're going to help her, David. We're going to bring Michael back into the light. And in doing so, we're going to save our family. David nodded, pulling me into a tight hug. I believe you, Sarah. I believe you. As we stood there in the dusty attic, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly knocked me over. We had faced the darkness. And we had found the light. Now, it was time to share it. The atmosphere in the house had shifted. It was no longer a fortress of silence, but a fragile, hopeful truce. Over the next few days, Eleanor was different. She was quieter, less sharp. She still corrected my dishwashing technique, but she did it with a sigh rather than a lecture. And once, I even caught her humming a soft, old-fashioned lullaby while folding Leo's laundry. But the real test was coming. The annual Miller family summer gathering. It was a tradition Eleanor had started decades ago. Every year, on the first Saturday of July, the extended Miller clan, cousins, aunts, uncles, and distant relatives, would descend upon our suburban home for a day of lawn games, potluck casseroles, and Eleanor's iron-fisted hospitality. In the past, I had dreaded these events. They were exercises in perfectionism, where every napkin had to be folded at a 45-degree angle and every conversation had to be suitably bland. This year, however, I had a plan. Are you sure about this? David asked on the morning of the party. He was standing in the living room, nervously adjusting his tie. Mom is, she's fragile right now. If we push her too hard in front of everyone, she might retreat. We're not pushing her, David, I said, smoothing out the tablecloth on the dining table. We're inviting her in. There's a difference. I had spent the last 3 nights going through Michael's box. I had carefully selected a few items, the crayon drawings, the tiny baby shoes, and the journal. I had also found an old, framed photograph of Eleanor holding baby Michael, smiling that radiant, unguarded smile. I had placed them all in a beautiful, antique wooden frame I had bought at a flea market. The guests began to arrive at noon. The house filled with the loud, boisterous energy of the Miller family. There were hugs, kisses, and the clinking of wine glasses. Eleanor was in her element, moving through the crowd like a general inspecting her troops, ensuring that the deviled eggs were perfectly symmetrical and that the lawn chairs were evenly spaced. I watched her from the kitchen, holding Leo on my hip. She looked beautiful, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes. She was performing. She was playing the role of the perfect matriarch, just as she had for 30 years. It was time to change the script. I waited until everyone was seated for lunch. The long dining table was groaning under the weight of casseroles, salads, and Eleanor's famous apple pie. The chatter was loud, a mix of gossip and polite small talk. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, raising her glass. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "I am so pleased you could all join us. Let us raise a glass to family, to tradition, and to the enduring strength of the Miller name." "To the Millers," the crowd chorused, raising their glasses. As they began to drink, I stood up. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," I said, my voice steady and warm. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Eleanor looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I wanted to say how wonderful it is to see everyone here," I continued, smiling around the table. "And I wanted to share something special with you all. Something that has been hidden for far too long." I walked over to the sideboard, where I had placed the framed photograph and the open journal. I picked them up and carried them to the head of the table. "Eleanor," I said, turning to her. "You have always taught us about strength. About resilience. About the importance of family. But you never told us about the foundation of that strength. You never told us about Michael." A collective gasp went around the table. Several of the older relatives exchanged shocked glances. David's name was rarely spoken in this house. Eleanor's face went pale. She stared at the photograph in my hands, her eyes wide with panic. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" "I'm honoring him," I said gently. I placed the photograph on the table, facing the guests. "This is Michael. He was David's older brother. He was born in 1985, and he was loved beyond measure." I opened the journal to a page I had marked. "And this is his story. Written by his mother." I began to read. I didn't read the tragic last entry. I read the first one. Today, my heart began to beat outside my body. He is perfect. He is everything. My voice was clear and steady, filling the silent room. I read about his first smile, his infectious laugh, the way he would grab Eleanor's finger and hold on tight. As I read, the tension in the room began to dissolve. People were leaning forward, listening intently. Some of the older aunts were wiping tears from their eyes. When I finished, I looked at Eleanor. She was staring at the photograph, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. A single tear was rolling down her cheek, but she wasn't hiding it. She wasn't wiping it away. "He was beautiful," Aunt Margaret, David's elderly aunt, said softly. "I remember him. He had your eyes, Eleanor." Eleanor looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "He did. And he was loved," I added. "He is still loved. And his memory is not a curse, Eleanor. It's a gift. It's a reminder of how much capacity for love is in this family." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, David stood up. He walked over to his mother and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He was my brother, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm proud to be his brother. I'm proud to be your son." Eleanor looked at David, then at me, then at the photograph. She took a deep, shuddering breath. And then, she did something no one at that table had ever seen her do. She smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile of the matriarch. But a real, genuine, heartbreakingly beautiful smile. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for bringing him home." She reached out and touched the photograph, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. "Michael," she whispered. "My heart." The spell was broken. The tension vanished, replaced by a wave of warmth and connection. People began to talk, not about the weather or the stock market, but about memories. About lost loved ones. About the messy, beautiful, painful reality of family. For the rest of the afternoon, Eleanor was different. She sat on the porch, holding Leo in her lap, telling him stories about his Uncle Michael. She laughed, a real, hearty laugh, when Leo drooled on her expensive blouse. She didn't correct anyone's posture. She didn't critique anyone's casserole. She was just Eleanor. A grandmother. A mother. A woman who had finally put down the weight she had been carrying for 30 years. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lawn, I sat down beside David. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "You did it," he whispered, kissing my temple. "You saved her." "No," I said, watching Eleanor bounce Leo on her knee, both of them giggling. "We saved each other." It wasn't a perfect day. There were still awkward moments, still tears, still the lingering shadow of grief. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, the Miller family was whole. As the guests began to leave, hugging Eleanor with a newfound tenderness, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We had faced the past. We had spoken the unspeakable. And we had come out the other side, stronger, more connected, and more loving than ever before. The wall of silence was gone. And in its place was a bridge. A bridge built on truth, on love, and on the memory of a little boy named Michael. The days following the family gathering felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream into a bright, sunlit morning. The oppressive silence that had haunted our home for so long had been replaced by a new, vibrant rhythm. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. A week after the party, I came home from the grocery store to find Eleanor in the kitchen. She wasn't wearing her usual immaculate suit. Instead, she was wearing a soft, faded floral apron that looked decades old. Flour was dusted across her cheeks, and there was a smudge of chocolate on her chin. "Sarah," she said, looking up with a rare, genuine smile. "You're just in time. I need a second opinion." On the counter sat a tray of freshly baked cookies. They were slightly lopsided, and a few had burned edges. In the past, Eleanor would have thrown them in the trash without a second thought, deeming them unworthy of the Miller name. Today, she was holding one up to the light, examining it with curiosity. "I tried a new recipe," she explained. "Michael's favorite. Chocolate chip with a hint of sea salt. I found the card in his box." My heart swelled. "They look delicious, Eleanor." "Try one," she urged, handing me a warm cookie. I took a bite. It was sweet, salty, and incredibly comforting. "It's perfect," I said honestly. Eleanor let out a small, satisfied sigh. "It's not perfect. The oven temperature was off. But it tastes like him. And that makes it good enough." In that simple moment, I knew we had truly turned a corner. Eleanor was no longer trying to be perfect. She was allowing herself to be human. Over the next few months, the changes in our household were profound. Eleanor stopped treating Leo like a recruit in training and started treating him like a grandson. She taught him how to plant marigolds in the garden, getting dirt under her perfectly manicured nails. She sang him old folk songs, her voice soft and melodic. And she started sharing stories about Michael, not with pain, but with a bittersweet warmth that brought us all closer together. One rainy afternoon, while Leo was napping, Eleanor called David and me into the living room. She was holding the leather-bound journal I had found in the attic. "I've been reading it," she said, her voice steady. "It's hard. Some days, the grief still feels like a wave that could drown me. But reading his story, it reminds me that he was here. That he was loved. And that love doesn't die." She handed the journal to David. "I want you to have this. And I want you to share it with Leo when he's older. I want him to know his uncle. I want him to know that our family has survived loss, and that we are stronger because of it." David took the journal, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, Mom." Eleanor then turned to me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver locket. "The one that had started this entire journey. And this," she said, placing it in my hand. This belongs to you now, Sarah. You are the heart of this family. You brought us back to each other. You taught me that strength isn't about hiding your pain. It's about sharing it. I looked down at the locket, feeling its weight in my palm. It was no longer a symbol of fear or secrecy. It was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between the women of the Miller family. Thank you, Eleanor, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'll keep it safe. No, she said, smiling softly. You'll wear it. And you'll tell Leo its story. All of it. As the seasons changed, so did we. Autumn brought crisp air and golden leaves, and with it, a new tradition. Every Sunday, we started having Michael's dinner. We would cook his favorite meals, share stories, and leave a small plate at the table in his honor. It wasn't a somber occasion. It was a celebration of a life that had been cut short, but never forgotten. One crisp October evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Leo banging his spoon on his high chair tray, Eleanor raised her glass. To Michael, she said, her voice clear and strong. And to us. For finding our way back. To Michael, we echoed, clinking our glasses together. Later that night, after Leo was asleep and the house was quiet, I stood in the nursery, watching the moonlight stream through the window. David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. You okay? He asked, resting his chin on my shoulder. I'm more than okay, I said, leaning back against him. I'm happy. For the first time in a long time, I feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. He kissed my cheek. Me too. You did this, Sarah. You broke down the walls. We did it, I corrected him. Together. We stood there in the quiet, listening to the steady rhythm of Leo's breathing. The baby monitor sat on the shelf, its little green light blinking steadily. I glanced at it and smiled. I didn't need to listen in anymore. I knew what I would hear, the quiet, steady rhythm of a family that had found its way back to each other. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. I stretched, smiling, and walked into the kitchen. David was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Leo was in his high chair, covered in oatmeal, giggling as Eleanor tried to wipe his face with a napkin. Good morning, sunshine. David said, turning to grin at me. Good morning, I said, walking over to kiss him. I then turned to Eleanor. Good morning, Mom. Eleanor looked up, a smudge of oatmeal on her own cheek. She smiled, a real, warm, unguarded smile. Good morning, Sarah. Breakfast is served. And don't worry, I didn't use liver pâté. We all laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. As I sat down at the table, I reached up and touched the silver locket resting against my collarbone. It was cool against my skin, a tangible reminder of the journey we had taken. We had faced fear, grief, and misunderstanding. We had broken down walls and built bridges. And in doing so, we had found a love that was deeper, stronger, and more resilient than we ever thought possible. Life wasn't perfect. There would be more challenges, more losses, more moments of doubt. But we were ready. We had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms, was the anchor that kept us steady. I looked at David, at Leo, and at Eleanor. My family. My heart. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely at peace. The end.